A former gay seminarian decides to write a letter to Pope Francis years after being kicked out of the church and rejected by his own family. He wasn't expecting a reply. He didn't want a miracle. He just wanted to be heard. But months later, something crazy happens. He gets a personal invitation to a private audience at the Vatican. When he gets there, he realizes he's not alone. Other people, queer folks, outcasts, survivors, have also been invited. And the Pope? He's been listening in silence to the kinds of stories the church has ignored for generations. From that meeting on, a new journey begins, one of healing, visibility, and deep reckoning. Not just for the young man who finally gets to be seen for who he is, but also for Pope Francis himself, who faces one of the most profound moral crossroads of his public life. To openly and fully embrace the LGBTQIA plus faithful. No filters. No footnotes. Just truth. The letter that was never meant to be answered. I wrote the letter on a cold November night, my eyes swollen from crying, my heart so heavy it barely fit inside my chest. The soft light from the lamp barely lit the page. The pen kept skipping, and I could hardly breathe between one paragraph and the next. I wasn't expecting a reply. I wasn't even sure anyone would read it. But I wrote it anyway. Because there were things inside me that had to come out before they swallowed me whole. The letter was addressed to Pope Francis. Yes. The man in white. The head of an institution that once welcomed me with promises of love and threw me out the moment they saw who I really was. My name is Tomás. I'm 34 years old. And for nearly half my life, I was a seminarian. I studied theology, philosophy, Latin. I could recite all of Paul's letters to the Corinthians and quote St. Augustine by heart. I loved faith. I loved the silence of the chapels, the smell of the pew's wood, the breeze that flowed through stained glass during early morning mass. But there was one thing the church never allowed me to love. Myself. I was gay. And for years, I tried to deny it like it was a stain. I went to confession. I fasted. I prayed. I spent entire nights begging God to change me. But God never answered me with change. He answered with silence. And in that silence, I started to wonder if maybe the problem wasn't me, but the way I was taught to hate myself. I was expelled from the seminary after someone found messages on my phone from an ex-classmate. The word the rector used was scandal. The official dismissal letter said I had violated the values of celibacy and Christian morality. I was expelled from the faith. But more than that, I was expelled from my own story. I came home with 2 suitcases and a degree that meant nothing. My mother hugged me, hesitantly. My father didn't look me in the eye for weeks. At Sunday lunch, they said grace without ever mentioning my name. For years, I carried that rejection like dragging a body behind me. I tried teaching. Then translation. Tried to move on. But there was always a part of me that hadn't been buried, just suffocated. Until that night. Until the letter. I wrote with honesty. With pain. But also with love. Holy Father. I don't write expecting a reply. I'm not trying to make noise. I just want you to know we exist. There are faithful people who still love the church, even when it refuses to love them back. I was a seminarian for 12 years. And I was gay for all of them. I never hurt anyone, never lied, never broke my vows in any way different than my fellow seminarians. And yet I was treated like a leper. You speak of mercy. But mercy, Holy Father, only matters when it touches what the church still prefers to keep hidden. I finished the letter at 3:17 a.m. Signed it with just my first name and address. Folded the page. Placed it in an envelope. Put on a stamp. And left it on the table, unable to send it. For 2 days, I just stared at it. Until, on a random Saturday, I took it to the post office. It was the last act of faith I had left. A breath in the dark. A whisper tossed into the wind. Months passed. I went back to my routine. Started a new job. Moved to a new apartment. Packed away what was left of me in invisible boxes. Until one day, an envelope arrived in the mail. Postmark, Vatican. Golden seal. And inside, a simple handwritten note, just 3 lines. We received your letter. We'd like to invite you for a private audience. Peace be with you. Francis. I froze. Thought it was a prank. A mistake. A cruel joke. But it wasn't. Pope Francis had read my letter. And he wanted to listen. The White Room. The flight to Rome was silent. I boarded the plane with sweaty hands, a twisted stomach, and the same question looping in my head. Why me? I wasn't anybody. Not famous, not a renowned theologian. I didn't have followers, didn't publish articles. Just a former Latin American seminarian living in the U.S., trying to rebuild after losing everything I once believed in. And yet there I was, landing in Fiumicino with a letter signed by Pope Francis himself, inviting me to a private audience at the Vatican. It still felt like a mistake. But it wasn't. An official car picked me up at the airport. It had a simple sign on the dash, Tomás. Inside was a quiet Italian driver with a movie-like presence. Benvenuto, he said with a slight nod. The car drove through the eternal city toward the towering Vatican walls. As we passed through the gates, a chill ran through my whole body. The roads inside the Vatican looked like sacred mazes, watched by eyes that seemed to know too much. We pulled up to a discreet side entrance of the Apostolic Palace. A Swiss guard opened the car door gently. This is your entrance. Entrance to what? I whispered. To the White Room. I was led down long corridors, frescoes on the walls, red carpets that muted every step. My guide was a silver-haired nun, glasses hanging from her neck and a calm gaze. She never said her name. But she did say something I'll never forget. The Holy Father isn't looking for answers. He wants to listen. That line disarmed me. She left me in a waiting room with water, coffee, and plain cookies. Inside, others were already there. A black man in a blue suit, maybe around 50, eyes heavy with exhaustion. An indigenous woman with long braids, clutching a folder full of documents. A young guy wearing a trans pendant around his neck. And an older woman in a colorful dress, holding a framed photo of someone she'd lost. It wasn't just about me. It wasn't just my letter. It was about us. Nobody spoke loudly. Some just exchanged glances. Others wept quietly. A young woman approached me, maybe 25. Long skirt, white blouse, big eyes full of courage. Did you get a letter too? She asked. Yes. You're also thrown out. Me too. She smiled with her eyes. I'm Carla. I was baptized as Carlos, but I get it, I said. We sat side by side. She told me she was an altar server until she was 15. She loved reading about the saints. But when she told her parish priest she was trans, he called her a divine mistake. I just wanted to belong to something, she said. And now? Now. I just want to be heard. Suddenly, the door opened. A young Argentine priest with a thick accent said, Están listos. El Santo Padre los espera. He's ready. The Holy Father is waiting for you. We walked in silence, single file. We entered a room filled with soft natural light. No grand decorations. Just white chairs arranged in a circle. At the center, a man dressed in white. No mitre. No golden cross. Just Francis. He stood, greeting us with a small smile of calm, but deeply present. Gracias por venir. Thank you for coming. His voice was low but strong. The kind of voice that never needs to rise to be heard. We sat down. He remained standing. Today, I'm not here to teach, he said. I'm here to listen. He paused. Because sometimes the church speaks so much that it forgets to listen to those who need to be heard the most. And there we were, all of us inside that white room. Each with our pain. Each with our hope. And as Francis sat with us, no pulpit, no altar, just as a man, I realized that maybe, just maybe, something was finally starting to change. Those who were never heard. The room was as quiet as an empty cathedral. But the energy inside felt like an entire world waiting to be validated. Pope Francis sat with his hands resting on his knees, slightly leaning forward. Not just physically, but emotionally, too. Like someone who came to listen with his whole being. There were no cameras. No microphones. Just ordinary people with stories that had never reached the altar. The first to speak was the woman with the framed photo. This, she said, lifting the picture with trembling fingers, is my daughter. Her name was Mariana. She was a lesbian. She wanted to become a Eucharistic minister. They told her she couldn't. At 19, she jumped off the bridge in our hometown. I came here so that you know, she existed. She placed the photo in the center of the circle. Francis looked directly at it. He closed his eyes, made the sign of the cross, and whispered something in Spanish. It was a prayer. One none of us had ever heard spoken in public. Then came Carla. Holy Father, she began. I spent 10 years trying to be right. I tried to stop being who I am, because I thought that's what God wanted. But now I believe God didn't make me wrong. The silence was the mistake. She cried. And for the first time in my life, I saw Pope rise from his chair and embrace a trans woman. It was brief, but real, and eternal. Next came David, the black man, who said he was a former priest. He had been removed for inappropriate behavior after being seen entering a gay bar, even though he hadn't done anything. I never broke my vows, he said. But I was treated like a sinner. Not for sinning, but for existing. Francis listened silently. He didn't defend. He didn't deflect. He simply held space. And sometimes, a single tear would fall from his eye. Then it was my turn. My heart pounded like a time bomb in my chest. My hands were shaking. My voice unsure. But I spoke. Holy Father. My letter wasn't meant to cause anything. It was just a plea to be heard. Because the deepest pain I've ever lived wasn't being kicked out of seminary. Wasn't losing my parents. It was learning to apologize for something that was never wrong. My eyes welled up. I loved the church. I still do. But I've learned to love myself too. And I was told I had to choose between the two. Pause. But I don't believe God asks that of me. And if he doesn't, why does the church? Francis looked at me. Not with pity, but with deep, authentic humanity. He simply said, Gracias por tu courage. Tu existencia también es sagrada. Thank you for your courage. Your existence is also sacred. Those words shattered something inside me. A wall I didn't even know was still standing. That day, we heard 10 stories. From mothers. From sons. From former clergy. From people who wanted just one thing. To be heard, without fear. And for the first time ever, that happened inside the Vatican walls. At the end, Francis stood. He looked each one of us in the eye. And said, They told me this would be a mistake. That it's not the Pope's role to hear these voices. But I say, how can we speak of the gospel if we won't listen to the ones the gospel came to save? Silence. Today, I take your names, your pain, your truths. He made the sign of the cross over all of us. And finished. Because if God didn't cast you out, who am I to do so? when God is truly love. The meeting ended with a quiet group hug. No one said much after the Pope left the White Room. There was no need. The language that day had been different: listening, empathy, presence. We were driven back to the hotel feeling like we had lived something we didn't even know was possible. But what none of us knew was that it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. 2 days later, still in Rome, I received an envelope at breakfast. It was from the Vatican. Inside was a simple note. Tomorrow, there will be a private mass. The Holy Father asks that you and the others be present. No location. No details. Just a time, 7 a.m. I arrived at the designated spot before dawn. It was a small, unnamed chapel within the Vatican gardens. Simple wooden pews. No signs of power. Just a wooden cross hanging above the altar and a ceramic chalice on the table. We were there, the 10 of us. 10 voices. And then he entered. Francis. No golden robes. No ceremony. Just a white coat, a rosary in hand, and the same look of someone carrying the weight of centuries, but finally choosing to make it lighter. He celebrated Mass in Spanish. But that morning, the words came from somewhere deeper. They weren't just rites. They were answers. During the homily, he did something I still can't talk about without shaking. Jesus didn't come to bless empty temples, but hearts that are full. And I have heard hearts that are full. Full of love. Full of pain. And full of truth. He paused. The silence in the chapel was absolute. And that's why, from this moment on, as pastor of this church, I bless your names, your lives, your very existence. Because you, too, are part of the body of Christ. And the body of Christ is not divided by gender, orientation, or shame. Carla, beside me, cried in silence. David clasped his hands as if holding the weight of the world. The woman with the photo pressed her daughter's image to her chest. And me. I broke down. It wasn't just a blessing. It was validation for an entire life. It was what I had asked for in that letter, and never imagined I'd hear. At the end of the Mass, the Pope called us by name. One by one. Carefully. With reverence. To each of us, he handed a small card with a handwritten phrase. Mine read, "Do not be afraid to love, because God loved you first." Francis. As we left, a Vatican photographer asked to take a group photo. We asked, "Will this be published?" He smiled and replied, "There are still places where love needs proof. And this photo will be one of them." In the following days, headlines from around the world read, Newspaper: Pope Francis holds private mass with LGBTQIA plus Catholics. Newspaper: A historic meeting in the Vatican. Newspaper: Francis: If God doesn't exclude them, why should I? Newspaper: Change or miracle. But for me, none of it was headline worthy. It was redemption. Not just of my story, but of the stories of all those who had been silenced in the name of a faith that, deep down, had always been about love. And on that sunny morning in the Vatican gardens, when the Pope looked me in the eyes, touched my shoulder, and said, "Gracias por escribir." Thank you for writing. I understood that the letter I wrote on that sleepless night had, in fact, been answered. Not just by him, but by God. In the right time, in the right way. The faith that gave me back to myself. Coming home after the Vatican felt like returning from a place where time had paused, just long enough for love to finally be heard. But outside the walls of the Holy See, life goes on. And not everyone was ready to listen to what we had lived. In the first few days, I was flooded with messages. Mobile phone people I knew saying, "The church is losing its way." Mobile phone anonymous comments calling me a tool of the enemy. Mobile phone childhood friends telling me I had gone too far by exposing my story. But among the hundreds of discordant voices, thousands of others came. Orange Heart, a mother, wrote, "My son is gay and always dreamed of becoming a priest. You gave me the courage to tell him that God never stopped loving him." Yellow Heart, a young trans man, messaged, "I saw your name in the article. For the first time, I wanted to pray again." Speech Balloon, a former missionary, shared, "I thought I had to choose between God and myself. Thank you for showing me I can be both." And that's when I realized I hadn't just gotten my faith back. I had become a path for others to find theirs again too. I started going to Mass again, this time in inclusive communities where the altar is wide enough for everyone to belong. I began to write, turned my original letter into a book, then into a social project, then into an online platform connecting LGBTQIA plus people with safe, affirming faith spaces. I called the project "If God Hears Me," because from the beginning, that was my deepest prayer. And now, it became my gift to the world. Months later, I was invited to speak at a conference in the U.S. The topic, queer spirituality and belonging. It was a small auditorium, but packed. People from everywhere. Young folks. Elders. People in transition. Whole families. I stood on stage for a few seconds before speaking. Then I saw her, sitting in the front row. A young woman wearing Carla's necklace. The same one. The same little flower pendant, hanging from a red cord. It was her. We hugged after the talk. She told me she now led workshops on spirituality and gender identity in progressive Catholic schools. "Faith once pushed me out," she said. "But now, I'm the one opening the doors." The woman with the photo wrote to me. She said she felt like her daughter had finally been placed on the altar of memory. She was seen. And that gave me peace. David, the former priest, began organizing retreats for LGBTQIA plus people who had been excommunicated. He said communion was more than bread. It was connection. It was belonging. A year later, I received another letter from the Vatican. This time, just one sentence. "The seed you planted has bloomed. Thank you for not giving up. Francis." That night when I first wrote my letter felt like a lifetime ago. But it was the beginning of everything. A letter I thought would be the end became the door to a new beginning. And I began again. With faith. With pride. With courage. With God. And most importantly, without having to leave any part of myself behind. The name that holds who I am. If you asked me today who I am, I'd answer differently than I ever have before. I'm not just the former seminarian. Not just the young man who was cast out for loving wrong. Not just the guy who wrote a letter thinking no one would ever read it. I'm Tomás. And now, that name carries everything I've been, everything I lost, and everything I found again. But more than that, I'm someone who dared to be whole, even when faith told me I had to split myself in two. For years, I believed God was on the other side of a wall, and that I had to climb it, begging forgiveness for every part of who I was. But one day, I realized God had always been right beside me. He cried with me when I hid. He whispered when I thought he was silent. And when I finally wrote down my truth, he listened. Even if his name was Francis. Some will say it was luck. That the Pope chose me by chance. That the whole thing is too symbolic to be real. But I say, symbols are what hold the soul upright. And the strongest symbol I carry now is the knowing that faith doesn't have to be a place of guilt. It can be a place of healing, of rebuilding, of belonging. On my bookshelf, beside old theology books, sits a framed photo. In it, there we are, the 10 of us. In the chapel. At Mass. That morning when love broke protocol. Above the photo, a handwritten line. Do not be afraid to love. Because God loved you first. Francis. Sometimes, I still hear Carla's voice echoing in my memory. Faith once pushed me out. But now, I'm the one opening the doors. And I realize, that's what we do when we choose to live in truth. We become the door. If you're hearing this story right now, and you've ever felt cast out, like your love is a mistake, or like your existence doesn't fit inside any temple, remember this. You are the temple, and God doesn't leave his own house empty. I'm Tomás, and this is my full name. With faith, with pride, with love, because now, I believe in a God who listens, a God who sees, and a God who doesn't ask me to hide in order to be worthy, who loves as they are, loves God too. This story is about faith, but it's also about those who were never given permission to have it. It's about reunion, about forgiveness, and about how a letter written in the dark can light up the whole world. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the stories of those who were never given space to speak. Comment below, have you ever had to choose between being yourself and being loved by God? Share this story, because every time it's told, a name that was silenced is spoken again.